Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are about to go to the Fremont County Pioneer Museum. This one is going to be absolutely epic and I can't wait to share this with you. We are about to have a wonderful time here in Lander, Wyoming. We're starting off with the gallery, but our admission of $6 covers both the interior and exterior space. I am very excited to share this with you guys today. This is something that I have been anticipating coming to the entire time I've been in town, and so it should be quite magical. Oh, wow. Check this out, guys. There is a work in progress. This is the art of this particular local artist, and he has a private collection that is on display here. It says here that he moved in the early 70s to Colorado, and then he came to Wyoming, and he is setting out to experience the American West and capture it within his art. And I think you can see just from this starting corner some of these beautiful pieces right here. But that is only the beginning. The capturing of life is so spectacular in this gallery, from individuals to animals that he has found to landscapes. There are so many incredible arts here. This one almost looked three-dimensional as I came into the room because of the technique. It is so nice. And then additionally, each one of them has the name in a small little annotation below it, and you can see this just wraps all the way around until we get to the other galleries. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to come here was because not only did they have this really impressive interior space, but they have an equally impressive exterior space. So as we move around, we're going to see some incredible things inside that set the tone for what we're going to find outside. And so I think what I'm going to do is kind of move toward the back of the gallery and start kind of working my way forward. And then we have a second floor to go to, and then we're going to go outside. We start off in this section with this saddle. This was actually from the Crow people. The Crow people lived and hunted in the Wind River Valley along with many other tribal groups. And you can see this particular Crow saddle is so intricate, so detailed. The beadwork is amazing. What you might not know about Lander is it is directly beside one of the reservations. And so their attempt to not only tell the stories of the people here in Lander, but also the people who have made up Wind River Valley. Now, this particular headdress was actually used in a silent film, and many local Native Americans were in McCoy's silent pictures, McCoy being Tim McCoy. This is a sage-grouse feather headdress that originated sometime between 1900 and 1920, and it was worn by an Arapaho chief. Then you get down here, and these are actually also Arapaho and come from around 1910 to 1925. Now you might notice this pattern here, and this pattern has been taken over by other groups, but the indigenous people have been using this to signify the sun long before the Germans ever picked up and adopted this particular symbol. I think it's super important to set the tone of history by setting things straight. A lot of people associate this particular symbol with only the Germans, but the indigenous people had it first. And they were using it to represent a piece of their world in a unique way. And so symbolism does matter, but at the same time, education about symbolism is just as important. I think you can see through this particular display right here, many of the items that have been put on display, including so many of the beaded moccasins, from the very, very small to the adult size, different styles for different types of weather, and each one of them is unique and different. In fact, culturally, each of these symbols means something to an individual, and that's why they may look different than the next person who is in the same tribe. And so at the different places that I've gone to, I've learned about how they would ornately bead different things, and based on their occupation within the group or within their particular family group, they would have symbols, and that's pretty interesting. Of course, here we are able to see some of the arrowheads that they have found. It mentions that humans have lived in this part of Wyoming for at least 12,000 years, and they arrived as early as the glaciers. So you can find the various years that they have found along the way, how those varied, what they looked like, and what they would use for each of the animals that they were hunting here on this display. This is one of the more fascinating ones because it takes you through the years of different kinds of hunting, but it also takes you all the way back to the woolly mammoths, which they have found in this area and proven existed at the same time as humans because of the points. It's another reason we come to museums, because we put things in context of time. A lot of times our contextual timeline is really weird as a result of things that we have observed in media and things that we have seen in movies and things that we've been told. But in all reality, they can trace these things back together and show that they did correspond at the same time. In this next section, we see a display of a general store, but not just any general store. This was the general merchandise and post office that was located just a short distance outside of Lander. This was J.K. Moore. He was known as Jimmy, and he grew up behind the counter of his father's store and then later took over in 1906. And you can see all of the different things that might have been carried in that store, but also the sign that they would have used. And here you can find all sorts of interesting items, from ornate china to kettles to a small stove, which likely would have heated the store, but also would have been available for sale at some of the stores. You can find beads that they would have brought in, thread, all of the things to cook, clean, and make clothing. And because this was also the post office, they would have had this section in the back to separate the post office items. And then this section in the front where people could come and check their boxes using their little combination. It says here that he started out with this general store, but later purchased another store in Lander and employed family members to manage it. And this is where that store would have been located, in the downtown area. Now, I do know that you can take the historic tour that I am going to do, and it tells you a little bit more about all of the different places, and I'm interested to see if we can find this one. Moving back to the indigenous people of this area, though, the ancient images of Wind River County. It says here that they've lived on the river basin for at least 11,000 years, and you can see through their drawings, etchings, and petroglyphs some of the people who may have inhabited these areas. Definitely say that if you are coming to the Wind River Valley, you should come in here first and then go explore all of the additional side tracks, because this is going to give you the context for those whenever you go out to them, especially when it comes to the petroglyphs. In more modern times, they're still doing powwows, and in fact, the last time that I was here, they were actually doing one of their powwow ceremonies, and these are an important part of Native American culture. The nice thing about the powwows is if you are wanting to go and learn about the culture, you can. You can go to these, and they open them to the public, so the public can come in and be a part of the ceremony and observe their culture and learn from their culture. And if I was here at the right time, I would totally take you guys, because I think they're incredible. However, I'm a few weeks early on this upload, so we missed it by just a little bit. Now, they also have a map of all of the North American Indian tribes during the mid-1800s, and you can see this is the Wind River corridor that we're in, and this is the Shoshone. So this particular area was highly populated by that particular group, and as a result, you can see many of the indigenous people through photos here in the gallery that actually have inhabited this area. There are a few other things in this part of the museum, so I'm just going to show you a few of them, and then I'll meet you over on the other side. As we move to the back of the museum, we pick up here at the Wyoming jade display. It says here that the Wyoming jade formed a mineral that is noted for its attractive colors and patterns. And you can see those colors and patterns as we kind of look through this display. Because of this and its toughness, people have used it for jewelry and carving, and it's rated one of the best in the world, believe it or not. So we've heard of the gold rush, but have you heard of the jade rush? It actually happened here as well, where people were seeking out this particular stone because they wanted to turn it into things and make profit from it. When they were digging, they also found things like this, which is a shallow marine fossil. And they learned that part of Wyoming was actually underwater at one point, even to the extent of finding things like this, saying that The plains that we now roam upon here were once all water. Kind of a weird thing to think of whenever you look at the overall context of history, but versus like where we are now. When we go out, we see the cutting river and how it's eroded away pieces of the mountains around you. But never would you think that those were at one point completely submerged underwater. We now move to the Cunningham quilt. And this is a unique quilt that you can see uses a very specific, almost crazy quilting kind of technique. This technique was used to express the Mormon migrations. You can see from the detail that she used a variety of different kinds of materials, including velvets and silks and satins. And this particular style uses all sorts of different stitches, and documentation indicates that Agnes, she spent 9 weeks aboard a ship and by rail car, and that was the time that she took to actually create this incredible quilt. Which leads us to this section, which talks a little bit more about the immigrant trails, but first starts off with the hair of the bear. That's right, all of these things in here are made from pelts in some way, shape, or form. In fact, trappers would come here and do all sorts of interesting things. They were considered to be mountain men. There is, in fact, a mountain man rendezvous that happens in this area as a result of the things that happened from these particular men. It mentions here that the first Rocky Mountain rendezvous was a meeting where they would get everybody together, and they wanted to hold it at the Burnt Fork of the Green River in Wyoming. And it was free trappers, company men, and Indians were all invited to come and trade together. Back in 1825, they had the forethought to put together this event, this collection of people, and it still goes on today. Immigrant trails were a little bit different though. They weren't coming out necessarily to come out and trap or kill or do anything like that. They were in fact coming out to find new homes. They were many times coming with oxen and a carriage or some kind of schooner at the time. And they would pull all the way across these horrific passes just to find the place that they needed to be. It's a migratory pattern of people who were coming across. And it's kind of interesting to see how that they made this happen, because they didn't have much. They could only put what was actually capable of going into their individual car, so to speak, and if you couldn't put it in there, it wasn't going. So you needed to stock up for your supplies for the long haul, plus the weather, plus any bad thing that could happen. And so you had to be prepared to be able to hunt for your food if you needed it. You needed to have enough dry goods that you could survive until you were able to not only get to the place, but also get set up and started. And there weren't any modern amenities whatsoever, so this was rough. At some point, however, people started to get to the area a bit more efficiently, and that started booms. There were several different groups of people who came along and found a way to exploit the land and make their money, and this is whenever the gold rush came. Now, South Pass City is a city up on the hill about 30 miles from here that you can go to that was a gold city, and at one point in time, they were considered to be a huge boom town. Now they're just a very small town that you can go to and visit some of the preservation. But here it talks about how people would come to this area, how they would mine, and some of the photos that you might have found from around 1869, for example, when South Pass City was booming. Now these photos right here highlight some of the workers that worked in those areas. It was a rugged, tough job. There were not a lot of frills, and it was very dangerous. In fact, it was so tough that when people first started coming there, they realized how hard it was, and many of them left. But they had a resurgence of a boom once again, and they were able to pull out a bit more. But the people who owned the mines always were the ones who made the most. The people who worked the mines were just barely making a living, realistically. And so it's kind of fascinating to see this beautiful display here so that we can learn a little bit more, because up on the mountain you can go up there and get a walking tour that kind of fills in some of the additional gaps. So again, this is important to come to before you go out there. But they weren't alone with gold. They also wanted black gold, coal and oil, and you could see how they would strip away the countryside and put up these guys right here, these cable tool derricks and drilling rigs that you could see right here, soon became the new thing as they were looking to strike it rich, and they found the Great Tar Springs. Found these because they would literally just seep out of the ground. Seeping tar out of the ground. Can you imagine it? So they would go and they'd punch a hole, and sure enough, there would be oil. And then they would sell that oil, they'd make money, and then they'd punch another hole. And much like a lot of places now in like West Texas, Wyoming was covered with oil. And so they just pulled as much as they possibly could. And they still do to some extent today, but it is in lesser fashion when it comes to the environmental impact of the land, at least. So they also have some information about the coal companies and how they started to pop up in the Wind River Basin. In fact, by around 1905, when the Northwestern Railroad began pushing toward, trains needed coal. So they started harvesting it from the very shallow pits in the ground very close to this basin area. This museum has so much more. It's amazing to see all of the different industries that have come through that have made it possible, but also just to see the way of life of people. I'm going to show you a few of these booths, but I want you to come check these out and see for yourself. There's a ton of reading that you can do here. There's so much context, and there's even some little touch screens that you can kind of interact with. Up with these three vehicles right here. This is a mountain spring wagon. The spring wagons were considered the pickups of the day, and you can see they had two somewhat padded comfy seats, a little bit of storage in the back, and they had big tall wheels and a step up that you'd have to step into, and these were actually pulled by horses, so they were not electric in any way, shape, or form. They were not gas combustible in any way, shape, or form. It was good old hard work by the horses. So you would have this very nice little buggy with no cover over the top of it, and that would be how you would get around. If you're a little bit more fancy, in which case you would have a piano box buggy, which had a little roof on the top so you could be shaded from the elements a little bit. And they said that doctors also used these a lot of times to travel throughout the country. It had, again, a horse-drawn option, a step up, big wheels, but not quite as big as the others. It was a bit more compact. Not as many people could ride in this, but it had a velveteen seat, which was a lot more cushy also. These ranged from $45 to $100, and that was considered to be pretty expensive. And so even though these were available to everyone, not everyone could afford them. And so these were considered to be an upscale version of the original. There's this guy, the John Deere Ironclad Mountain Wagon, and this was used the most, and it was used in the most extreme conditions. It says here that these were used in mud, sand, rock. They were mountain style wagons, so they had to be durable and tough, and John Deere produced them to be drawn by horses. You can see that they had areas on the side that were a lot more gritty and rugged. The wheels on these were huge and have a metal cap on them. They're just very large and in charge. Not different than our modern day vehicles. I would consider this to be like the cargo van of the old school stuff. Now this one is one of the most interesting. This is a sheep wagon, and you can actually walk into this one. This one was a home on the range. It was kind of like the modern day RV, except for the construction of these had most comforts, but as we walk in, you'll notice they're a little different than an RV. It's more like a gypsy wagon. You have a little bench over here to sit on, a pull-out table, some drawers where your kitchen would be, and then also a recipe for rattlesnake stew. Wagons were built for the nomadic lifestyle. They were built to have a home on wheels, again, like an RV, but with the biggest difference being that these sheep wagons were pulled again by horses instead of an electrical motor. Now, outside of the sheep wagon, you can find a lot of information about the sheep herding industry, see some of the original sheep herders over here, and find out about the great woolies, as they call them. The sheep business in this territory grew very quickly, and sheep became one of the biggest agricultural, industrial things to do here in the county. There was one man that they mentioned who had 9,000 head of sheep way back. way back, like 1882, 9,000 head of sheep. That is a lot of sheep. But with that, they were doing some big business. And even today, it's a very popular thing. I noticed that whenever I walked in, they have an annual sheep herding and sheep shearing thing that they do with the museum. It's part of the museum, like things that they participate with. And I think that's really neat. It's a good educational thing. Okay, with that, I'm gonna go upstairs. Again, I left you guys some really great brain wrinkles downstairs. I want you to go check them out. It's incredible to see how much they have in this museum for only $6. So much good information here. I am loving this. I'm geeking out so much. Throughout the museum, you'll see a series of signs. Each of these signs talks about either a person, a place, or a thing. And it gives you so much detail, but with each detail, also all of the historical photos. This is wonderful and brings us to this. But what is this? This is a crane and breed hearse from 1880. And this was a horse-drawn hearse that was built in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it is considered the Lincoln model. It was a horse-drawn hearse that was also used as an ambulance, and they would use the metallic coffins a lot of times. They could weigh up to 100 pounds just by themselves. I don't know how I feel about that one exactly. That's a little different, but at the same time, in incredible condition. All of the items here have been preserved to a level of immaculance. You can come through each of the displays, and as you're moving through them, you see the detail and the attention that they've put into each thing. For example, as I'm moving around this top floor right now, I am seeing a series of different settings. Each of the settings has the items that you might have found around that time, the details to go along with them to explain why, and then also if there are items of historic significance, they are expanded upon even more on those signs. Best thing about this place is no matter how much that you move around, you find details around every corner. It's impossible to cover all of them in a video because there's just so many. They have put so much work into this museum, and it shows through each and every section. They have explained pioneer living and what it would be like, from laundry in this case to banking here, and even the music and how that they would build the city. For example, with the music section, it says that in the 1880s, leisure time was not super common. People worked very hard. And when they did have that leisure time, they wanted to be able to cut loose and enjoy themselves. So music became the central focus of that. And still to this day in Lander, you can find live music performed at various places. And I think that that is the continuing legacy of even way back in the 1880s, still living today. But on the walls, you can also see some of the bands that they had here in Lander. And these would perform at special occasions, such as Christmas morning. They would do Masonic dances and other special events here in town. You can move directly from the music into something more popularized now, which is skiing. And there's a little display here that shows you some of the early ski slopes, but also they have right here, after World War II, the post-war boom, Americans began to recreate in new ways. And you can see some of the runs right here in the 50s in a town called Du Bois. And it's really interesting to see how by 1961, money was raised through Christmas tree sales to have their own ski club so that they could have more ways to recreate. And all of these things date back to those earliest times, being able to recreate in those ways. The war changed a lot of things for a lot of people in several different ways, and I think it's interesting that this area moved into a more like leisurely way of life with the skiing. Despite all of the hard things that had happened in their past before, the war loosened people up and made them appreciate these simple things and getting out and doing things with family and friends a bit more, I believe. And so recreation became a thing here, and it still is today. There's tons of hiking, there's tons of like different things that you can do with the ski culture still during winter, and there's so much more, from rafting and camping. Recreation is big here. They continue to move around. They have another one of these carts. This is the Surrey cart, and it was introduced in 1872 to the United States. They were originally built in England, and they were considered to be a pleasure cart. Notice they have the velveteen seats that are pretty cushy. They have little details on these because these are considered to be very fancy. The back wheels are actually bigger than the front wheels, but again, there are two step-ups, so a step up for the back and a step up for the front. Despite being super fancy, these had some problems. You can see that they are open to the elements, so they couldn't be used all the time because they were not great for inclement weather, but also, you guessed it, expensive. This wall that I'm about to show you is filled with historic photos like this, but I wanted to zoom in on specifically this one because it tells you about what the buildings were here in Lander in the earliest of early days. And it tells you also if the building is gone or is still there. But along the way, you can see this is a huge street that now we drive on. And whenever I was driving on it the other day, I thought, oh wow, this is a very wide downtown corridor. But you can see here that it has always been such. It's been very long and wide so that they could do congregating events and other things. And so that sets it apart from some of the other towns that I've been to that have a much smaller Main Street corridor. This is what I just showed you. But picture all of these historic photos that again bring you into the context of what the day once was, from the markets and the union halls to the furnishings and dry goods and everything in between. You can get a good glimpse at history, and then also watch this as you get to learn a little bit more about the people who were here during those days. Okay, we've moved outside and it is twofold. Number one, we have our farm implements right here. These are amazing. The collection is vast and they have a nice little walking area that you can go and check them out. I think it's interesting to see the little details, and even though I've seen some of these before at other places, seeing them in context of how they would have been together and used in this area is kind of fascinating. I'm also pretty sure some of these actually are from the mines. They look like they're from the mines. I'm not sure that they're from the mines, but they definitely look like they could have been used in some capacity for the mines. Oh, here we go. So some of these are actually used for maintenance in the city itself. That would explain why they looked like they were mining equipment. Some of these were from blacksmiths, and some of these were used on the good old farm. There is a sign on the far side over here if you're wanting to find out what exactly each of these items are and how they were used and when they were produced. You never know unless you go. And so this was a really great way for me to kind of see all this in context. Again, this museum is fabulous and it's only $6. Now, as we move through the second portion of the outdoor gallery, we are now at the Pioneer Museum. Each of these buildings has been put here to tell us the story of some of the people who once inhabited them, some of the people who once worked in them, and what the buildings themselves actually had to offer. Each one has a sign that has annotations as to what they were, who they were, and even more, but they also have additional context through some historical photos. On some days, as well as for certain events, they do have these buildings open so you can go inside and explore a little bit more. Today when I'm visiting, they are not. So if they have been whenever you've come, let me know. Show me some pictures. I want to see it. I want to see it. Found this monument and trail that goes in this direction. It takes you over some more implements, and it looks as though they have some benches for maybe like a talk whenever they're doing a talk out here. These monuments hold the names of all of the pioneer families that lived in these regions. Not only do they have the family name, but also whenever they, I'm assuming, settled here. And there are so many interesting pieces to this. This is a wonderful way to recognize the history of your community because these people were the first people who came, but they also dealt with the worst conditions. Now, here in Lander, during the wintertime, it can get pretty bad still to this day, but we have heat. We have the ability to get on like a snowmobile or use chains on our tires. However, they had none of those things, and they would have to navigate and also provide for their families. So that meant a lot of preparation and planning, and a lot of people did not fare well in these conditions. However, these pioneer families that are mentioned here, not only did they prevail, they actually thrived. And some of their families can still be traced to this point today because they enjoyed this community and did not want to give up. And I think that that's pretty incredible because it's not only honoring these people on the different memorials here, but it's also honoring the people whose families are still here to this day. We are now going over Skeeter's Crossing and toward our next building, which is right down here. Oh, Skeeter's Crossing is nice. It's just very calm. Here we find what would have been a farm home of sorts. This is a larger home than many, and we can look through the windows of this one. Oh, this one is very nice. This is a multi-room home. They have carpets and a very nice sofa. It looks as though they have a small chandelier. Interesting fun fact about this building, it's not currently available to the public, but is going to be very soon. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what they have inside whenever they're completely finished. But from what I can see inside right now, it looks like it has some form of doctor's chair in there. So maybe this would be a home of a wealthy doctor in the area. They also have some other things that they're clearly still working on in here, but this is amazing. One other thing to note, I'm not sure if all of these are original buildings or some of them are replica buildings. I haven't seen anything about that just yet, but I know that each one of them is supposed to be dedicated to something that was in the community. So I'm not sure, but I know for a fact that some of them look very, very nice. This one mentions that it was built on the bank of a small stream at the foot of Table Mountain, and it was the home of Wilbur Countant, the son of Dr. Charles Countant, and the author of The History of Wyoming, which was published in 1899. That book, that was the first published accountability of the history of the entire state. And this was the home. Wow. Wow. You can see this was a log home. It had what they would consider to be like a probably like earthen mud mix that would go in here. Now it looks like they've replaced it with something a bit more sturdy, but just a little log cabin. Coming to places like this always reminds me that you don't have to come from the biggest and best in order to do the most amazing things. And so by seeing places like this, you can truly understand that, because some of the originators of all the things that we know today didn't have very much. They grew up in like very meager upbringing with small cabins and things like that. But what else is incredible? This setup right here. This is so cool to see. And it looks like they're actually doing a little bit of work out here today. So they're just keeping up the legacy. And you can see there's a mercantile here, a livery. It looks like there might be a couple more homes. This might be a schoolhouse. It has a bell on it. We're about to find out. Mercantile was originally located at 172 Main, and it was constructed by John A. Thompson, who was the contractor. And it was one of the first frame structures here. And it was 1887 that it was built. And it was originally constructed to be a carpentry shop, but it has been many different things. And now it sits here to be many more things for many of us. The windows are open, so let's go look inside. Oh, that's incredible. Look at all the detail. Look at everything that they've put in here to bring us an experience, from bottles to canned goods, anything that you could find in a general store. It looks like there's a back room. They have some pelts. It looks like they have some other items, including clothing, a few hat boxes, some dishes. Of course, the good old cash register. Very neat. And the mercantile or general store was where they got like everything. If they couldn't get it there, they had to order it from a catalog, and then it would be delivered. There were a few different catalog services. They would take a really long time to deliver though. So it wasn't like, oh, Amazon where I can have it in 2 days shipping. No. Might be months. Sure enough, the little bell is in fact a schoolhouse from 1881. So the man who built the schoolhouse, his name was John Borner, and he was married to a woman who had a pretty famous sister, Calamity Jane. What? The schoolhouse was built right outside of the Indian Territory, right here in the valley area. And it served children and families for many, many, many years, and brought around education. Now, education was very different then than it is now. Many of the kids had to work, so they would not get a full education all the way up to like high school. it was a very truncated timeline. But inside these walls, that's where education began for many kids in the Wind River area. Now are looking at the Laird cabin from the 1800s. And here you can see, again, a just primitive cabin. There's a little window on the side that we can go look in. There's a big, heavy wooden door. It's just made out of big logs and timber that they would have found here in the wilderness or been able to harvest from somewhere else. The cabin was originally just outside of Lander by Squaw Creek. Oh, this is neat. I wish we could go in this one. They have it set up where it has more historic photos in there. Oh man, that's how it goes sometimes. You can get a good look at stuff, but you can't get the perfect look sometimes, and it's okay. Now, some of these buildings, like the one we just saw a while ago with the pictures, the historic photos inside, it has been modified to show those things as opposed to what life in a cabin would be. Same thing with this one. This one was originally a homestead building, but it has now been modified to show you what it would be like to be in a saloon in the day. So I think that that's really neat and a great way for them to preserve these amazing buildings, but at the same time bring about a great tale of American history for us all. This has been a great trip out here. There's been so many interesting things that I've learned and seen from the Wind River Valley area and from all of the people. And I think you guys should definitely not only check out Lander for this museum, but other things that are here. I've had a blast. As we depart this section and go back toward the van, I appreciate each and every one of you guys for coming out with me. Remember guys, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time. Check out places like this, $6. That's all I have to say. Bye.